delighted to introduce Beth Powell. She is a math specialist. She works with students middle through high school on math, especially students who struggle with math. And of late, she has come up with her own math program for struggling math learners called the Math Atlas. Beth and I have collaborated for some time now, and I think it's a privilege to have her here and speak to all of us how she teaches math with empathy.
Thank you so much, and it's wonderful to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So let's see if I can get. All right, there we go. Okay, so I realize that not everyone here is a math teacher, myself included. I'm actually a learning specialist, but I did take 1 year to teach math within a mixed population. And that was partly because when I talk about math instruction, I couldn't relate to what the teachers were talking about. And so I wanted to go have the experience of being a math teacher. And I quickly discovered that math teachers deserve a lot of empathy in our conversations with them. I hear all the horror stories because of the students I work with. I've been working in math for with students who are struggling in math for about 25 years. And so I hear things like, oh, my teacher has stupid is as stupid does above the chalkboard. And so I hear these stories and I'm like, oh, yeah. But I found as a math teacher when I was working, the students that I love one-on-one, I really did not know how to interact with them in the classroom. And from my perspective, I understood that was a problem of the system I was working in, but I can only imagine for math teachers that have never gotten to see the other side of it, what that must be like. So I wanted to kick off by saying, if there are math teachers in the room, I do present this with great empathy for the work you do, but I also feel like there's a lot of personal growth that math teachers can experience if they start to understand the role of empathy in math class. For folks that are not math teachers and maybe hate math, my hope was to present this in a way that you can feel connected and maybe understand more about your own experiences in math. Okay. So I'm kicking off. This is called Splats. This is a picture system that Steve Wyborny developed. And I want to share this because this is, when I launch into algebra, this is the image I use. The idea here is that you have 3 splats that are covering up dots. There's 19 dots total, and you can see 4 of them. Under each splat, there's the same number of dots. One of the first things I started doing to change this, because I do this to everything, is to say, oh, what story should we tell? I started with, oh, it's a cloudy night. There's 4 stars you can see, 19 stars in the sky and 3 clouds, and all the stars underneath are the same. Quickly, students came up with great stories. I love the abstract nature of these pictures because one, she loved, she's probably gonna be a medical student in the end. She did this as bones underneath on x-rays. And so the x-rays were hiding how many bones were in there. And so students can come up with their own stories around this. But I do want to give a moment for people to just take a moment and see how you would solve this. You might have been thinking about it as I'm speaking, but I'm going to be quiet for just a couple of seconds. And your goal is to find out what's underneath one of the clouds. And so the reason I like this, there's so many ways to solve this. If you want to take the time to say how you solved it in the chat, that would be amazing, just so we can see the diversity of thinking. But I have never met a student who couldn't solve this. Sometimes what they do is they go, well, I'm going to say 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So they're using a one-to-one counting strategy, and they're still able to solve this. So they're still participating with the entire group of kids, no matter how it's being solved. I have had some students that needed this to be made hands-on so they could actually physically hide things. But in the end, the answer is 5, or underneath each one. And so I wanted to lead with this just so you can see how much math education has been changing. and what a challenge that can be for some of the teachers, as well as what a gift it is for some of the students. But sometimes the traditional math students are also having a hard time with these new methods. So we're going to introduce 3 different parts of what I think of as being the whole student within the classroom. And the first part is what I mainly focus on, which is cognitive load. For when you're teaching, you can think about maybe the complexity of the problem or what background knowledge are the teachers bringing in. As a learning specialist, I'm thinking about, okay, how can I make this more accessible to the student? That didn't make sense to them. One of the coolest experiences, I worked in a junior high that had students that were 2 to 3 years behind in math as when they entered in 6th grade. And they would come in, I'd present a lesson, and I could tell it didn't make sense to some of them. So I'd go back. The next day, I would literally come in with a whole new version of how to present it based on the feedback I was getting from them. And the look on their face when they were like, oh my gosh, you listened to me and you created something? It was life-altering for them. And that to me was the first sort of entry point I had into understanding the empathetic cycle that we we're going through, where it was, I'm listening to you, you're listening to me, and I need to make this so your brain can hold on to it. And what I found was as materials are more accessible, the students started to have more buy-in. And to give you how profound this was for them, they were students who were, some of them couldn't enter the classroom to visit on the math day because they were sick to their stomachs. So these are like seriously impacted, emotionally impacted students. We did occasionally have very advanced students that just had other different challenges, but and so for math teachers, one of the things I like to teach as a signal that the cognitive load is starting to be too much is the kids are like, I can't focus, my brain is full. They'll also say this in tutoring sessions as well. When the students are starting to opt out, they're either getting off task or distracting others. And the way you can build perseverance for those students is to find these different ways to address what they're being challenged by, and that develops perseverance. Typically, I'm not actually saying math teachers need to be doing this work. I feel like this is more the work of educational therapists and learning specialists. But fundamentally, what I've heard from every student I've helped in math is that they say, I know what my brain needs now. And this begins to transfer to higher level classes when they're no longer working with me. They know how they learn and they can figure out, oh, this isn't working for me the way they're telling me, but I know if I get my highlighters out, I know if I get some hands-on pieces, I'll be fine. The other piece that I want to share more of an image of is that we expect kids to be so organized out the gate on their paper. And when you're doing creative mathematics and you're thinking, it's a lot to ask for things to be really organized and already coming out the gate in control. And so this top one, that is actually a seventh grader's work. I think many math teachers will look at that and say, she's not trying, she's just drawing. And it's really hard to see that there actually is, she's doing the work in there. You can tell probably from the drawing, she's very traumatized by math. And so the fact that she was able to engage, maybe not the level we're hoping for the progress through the math class, she's at least participating in class. And that sounds like an odd bar to be aiming for, but when you're working with students that can barely stand to be in class, the fact that she was participating was glorious, and we were able to build from there. The one on the bottom left is a student that, I don't know if you can tell, that is chart paper. So they really had severe dysgraphia, but the bigger we could make things, the more they could think clearly. And typically what I have found with these word problems is that the students, their thinking initially requires messy, it requires big, but as they start to get clear about how math word problems work and how their thinking clears up, suddenly their writing starts to clear up and get smaller as well. This one on the left, I just loved this. This is one where it's someone combining the hands-on, the drawing, and being able to transfer it to a page to demonstrate their understanding. And so that's more like a finale. That's what it can look like at the end. Okay, so beyond cognitive load, it's also your identity within the classroom and a sense of belonging. So in math classes, typically this splits, and I would love a sociogram on a math class if that exists, but typically it splits into, oh, those are the smart kids. If we're just quiet long enough, the smart kids will give the answer. Oh, I'm the one that like really doesn't get math. And the smart kids might be feeling like, oh, those are the people that just don't get it. Why can't we just move along? And so there's this often this rift within the class that is unintentionally supported by everybody. And I have seen great teachers and schools as a system try to undo um, that dynamic in the classroom. And it starts very young. I believe at kindergarten. I don't have the actual research, but the identifying how you identify as a math student starts very young. But I think there's a couple of really important questions. Who am I in the math class, and who can I be? And classes that allow students to explore that question of who can I be in this class are incredibly impactful. One of the great quote I heard was, "We teach students, not content." And they're bringing in so much into the room from past experiences, from social cues. I've had students that have really been through the ringer with their teachers to the point that I've had administrators not believe the stories they're telling. And it's really that is a heavy load to carry, to walk into a math class and hope that the teacher's not going to be cruel. And there's also the stories you tell yourself as you're working through challenges. We all experience this, in and outside of math, what you do when you come across a challenge. Some of the great work, there's math autobiographies, math self-portrait. There was a class that did a self-portrait at the beginning of the year, not my class. And they all drew like white men with crazy hair. And by the end of the year, after working on this idea of belonging, everybody drew themselves as a mathematician by the end of the year. And it was just incredible just to see that. Cultural identity as well, both from like racially in terms of like in the Bay Area, for instance, in the San Francisco Bay Area, we're so competitive. It's absurd with the mathematics. And so basically, does the student see themselves in the classroom? Think about your art students and your language arts students. Do they have a place in the math classroom? In my classroom, they certainly do. And they were shocked when I said, go ahead and draw. Like, I want to see your drawings, because that's how you communicate how you see the world to me. Do they feel seen? And so there's some really easy ways to start this just by using their names and their interests. So for instance, the splat we started with, that girl being able to share about x-rays and bones, she was just so excited. And then life circumstances. I think it's hard to remember students are humans too. And I learned this last year. I just love this, and I share this a lot. Empathy is contagious, thanks to this conference. And then the idea of being a warm demander. So it's not that, oh, I'm going to be empathetic and just get involved in your story. It's, I'm going to be kind and set expectations and help you meet those expectations. A really common thing we hear a lot is this idea of students saying, when am I ever going to use this? To me, that is sometimes a genuine question, but I think it's more a sense of, I'm starting to feel either lost or I need some self-preservation, and I'm rejecting this to protect myself. Because when kids are having fun in math, I never hear this. Like, we do the stupidest stuff sometimes, and they're not asking when they're going to use it because they're having fun. I do think there are high context learners, though, where that is an actual valid, they're really wondering, like, but where do I use this? Like, how is this going to come up? What's the context? The opt-out phrase that kind of gives you a clue within identity is, I can't do this, or this is stupid. But the perseverance comes from when the teacher believes in the student. And it's so-and-so believes in me, I got this. The power of that connection, that, hey, I may be having a hard time. I might not even get this, but that teacher hasn't given up on me. It's so critically important. Okay, so in the context of identity, the work I predominantly do is actually talking about the history of math. So it's going to feel like we're taking a little turn, but this is actually in the context of helping to place mathematics in the realm of humanity, because I really feel like students think math is either something that's this like glorious, awesome thing that they're really fast at, and it's so cool to be one of the top math kids, or it's something that's happening to them. And it's just this thing they have to survive. A very influential book I read was The Math Gene, How Mathematics Evolved and Why Numbers Are Like Gossip, by Keith Devlin. I happened in my master's to be studying the evolution of consciousness at the same time, and I noticed a few overlaps there. My master's is in transformative leadership with a focus on math education. And so I happen to be studying some interesting things. And so to tell a quick story, when we were hunters and gatherers, there wasn't a lot of need to communicate. There's a lot of pictures that were drawn, like the cave drawings. But as we started to settle down and farm, we had to begin to store the excess. And so we've got olive oil, wine and beer, and grains were typically what was stored. And you can see with the olive oil and the wine and beer, they at least had containers, but the wheat, all the grains were stored in silos. So it was essentially a communal process. And people were upset because they had put in some grains, but they couldn't record how much they had put in. There's literally no way to solve that issue when they first started storing grains together. And so you can see the first where it says number 1, they started developing clay tokens to say that, hey, I'd given you a bushel of wheat. Maybe the triangle is a bushel of amaranth. We don't know for sure what the tokens represented, but they definitely were tracking their crops with these tokens. And they had a problem because, like humankind today, they lost things. So they would have all these clay tokens, but they couldn't necessarily contain them. So step 2, they put the tokens into a clay envelope. And that took about, I believe it was about 1,000 years to figure out to do that. So then they've got this envelope. So when you want to get some of your grain back, you have to break it open and get a token and hand it. Again, very annoying because now you've got this broken thing and you have to make a new one. So they finally figured out, hey, number 3, let's stamp what's inside of the envelope, stamp it on the outside. So then we know what's in there. For about 1,000 years, I think they still cracked it open. But this was another like easily 1,000 years to get to this point. Don't ever quote me on my actual dates. And then finally, that led to number 4, the clay tablets with the impressions. That's where the writing developed from. So there's a couple of really important stories in here for me. 1, art came before math. And I cannot tell you how much the artists cheer in the room when they hear this. The need to make the mathematics, it was literally from a need to not get ripped off. People were tired of having stuff stolen from them. So they developed this system. So it was a solution to a problem that was a very human-based problem. And then finally, that writing came afterwards. And so that's part of why in multisensory mathematics, you've got the physical hands-on of number 1. And then we start going into the drawings, the drawing representations, which is technically 3, even though they're pressing into the clay. That's like a visual representation. And then finally, we have symbolic representation. And so when you think about why math can be so hard for students, they're not ready to move on from that first stage yet. It took thousands of years to make this leap. Let's give them a little more time. And so in the middle school, we actually spent tons of time drawing, building. If they were still needed one-to-one counting, they were doing grade level content, but with one-to-one counting. Okay, now we're back. So the final piece, and this actually took me a while to figure out, is the role of expressive language in mathematics. This is actually my biggest weakness. I studied math so I wouldn't have to read books or write papers. It was like the best thing ever to me. And I actually stopped studying math because I realized I was having a hard time communicating with other people because my language was getting so precise. In mathematics, everything has like these very discrete definitions and it means something very specific. And so when people were speaking generalities, I remember it being like, I don't know what you're saying. I better stop studying math. So I didn't go on to study. I got my BA in math, but I actually stopped because of that. And so one of the things with the expressive language piece, this is actually where I think a lot of the traditionally strong students struggle. And this is where I actually think some of the challenges with empathy come from, because when your language is challenged, it's harder to connect with other people. And so it was important to me to both include students that are traditionally strong but struggle in this area, as well as acknowledge that students with dyslexia, for instance, can have incredible challenges with learning vocabulary, explaining their thoughts. And so this is kind of the twofer. This is where you get a kind of both ends of the spectrum meet in this section, I would say. And the idea here is that when you have visual and verbal representations, then you have something to talk about. And when you can talk about things, it builds understanding. And so the fatigue on here could be that it's really hard to find words or take notes, but it's amazing the depth that students can go to when they're working hands-on or visually. Um, for the opt-out actually comes more often from the traditional students, which is, I already got the right answer. Why do I need to explain myself? But in the perseverance piece is really that I can make sense of math. For traditionally strong students, I would say this comes up in word problems more than the calculations. And so for this one, I wanted to give an example and illustrate a story from when I was teaching in the mixed ability classroom. And there was a student who was notoriously cruel. I don't know that his intent was to be cruel, but the outcome was students in tears from working with him. So he would be in a math group and someone might be having a hard time. There was a slow processor or a deep thinker, depending on your perspective. And she just couldn't follow what he was saying. And so he would say it more and he would say it louder. And literally, I like seeing the tears in her eyes was just like crushing to me. So in that class, what I did with the students that already understood the math content, I swapped their role. I said, you're not here to teach anybody anything. You're here to learn to listen and understand things from somebody else's perspective. And I would model this in class. And so for me, I would take the students that were actually confused and I would walk them through and I would identify, okay, where are you having mistakes? I would question to that mistake and help guide them to the right answer. And then I would make the students that, especially that student in particular that was needed to learn some social skills, I would be the student making the mistakes for him to practice on and make sure he could identify, okay, where are you thinking about it rather than me just talking at you. The really cool end to that story is I actually ended up keeping in touch with the family with the girl that was in tears. 3 years later, she's feeling like a solid math student. She's got it like under her belt. There's no more tears. That year, the mom told me that year really changed her perception of herself, because I was expecting people to understand her. It wasn't that he got any better at it. He may have made a few gains in there, but it was the expectation that she has a right to be understood really shifted her perspective about herself as a learner. And I just wanted to share a few photos. I love how much conversation happens when you have physical things to work with. It's funny to me when people try to do just traditional mathematics and have people talk about it. It's like, no, you're not sitting there talking about, oh, well, I multiplied the 2 by the x and I multiplied the 2 by the 4. Like you have to have things in front of you to talk about. And it's so much more engaging to have those physical pieces. Okay, so I want to do one last piece. I had the opportunity recently to work with a math teacher, and it was an interesting situation because he was not a trained math teacher, not credentialed, and he was working at a school where we met. He was not beholden to any particular content or approach. He literally had wide open freedom, with the exception of a few kind of benchmarks he was supposed to hit. He and I both felt that the school actually they were under, what do you call it? They were actually under aiming for what the students are capable of. So our first thing was like, how can we get the mathematics actually raised up and higher level? Because there actually is a school in the Bay Area that is sort of under aiming for what's possible. But it was such an incredible honor to work with him. So he's a white male. So very and has the slightly messy hair, very stereotypical looking math, presents as like someone who just likes to geek out on math. That's actually how he was described to me before I met him. And he cared a lot about the students that the advanced students be allowed to pursue advanced mathematics, and which I also support. But what happened in his first years, that kind of came at the expense of some of the other students. And what I found so interesting with working with him is that he was able to sit and reflect and say, oh, wait, I want to do things differently. And so we started working together. And so I was typically taking on the kids that had learning disabilities within the classroom because that's just more than I expected them to handle. But he started working on the identity pieces and the language piece. And he said, oh my gosh, these visuals, I never used these visuals before. Give me more of those. One thing came up in one of the classes where there was a gender split in the class, where unfortunately the males in the class were typically kind of more traditionally performing stronger than the females. And they called him out on it. And I wasn't sure what he was going to do because I had to have the conversation with him. It actually went home to the parents as it got into a pretty big deal. Because one of the students said it felt like it was gender discrimination. What was happening? And instead of digging in and saying, no, 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 I think women are totally capable of doing mathematics. He said, you know what? I made one really big mistake. I'm going to own that with the class. And that was, he was trying to support the girls in their math learning by giving them a specific workbook that was different from the boys. So that was actually the triggering event. But so he owned that with the class. And then I went into the class without him and gave a quick history of math chalk, talked about the Fields Medal, which is the mathematics medal because the Nobel Prize does not allow mathematicians in it. So they have the Fields Medal. The first time a woman was awarded the Fields Medal was in the 2000s. So it's been from 1950 to the 2000s. Miriam Mirzakhani was the first woman. She was actually a doodler. Her PhD was full of doodles. It was incredible. So I went and gave that whole spiel, had them all do a math autobiography and talk about, like, give them an opportunity to share with more of a neutral party how they felt about whatever they needed to bring up in the context of that, but without trying to point it out. And afterwards, he shifted how he was teaching that class. And suddenly, the entire ability of that class, both their understanding and their engagement, went up because he shifted how he was relating to the students. And he was paying much more attention to, am I calling on the girls? Am I making sure that they're getting what they need? And so he started doing pieces where everyone's working on the same stuff, but maybe you don't go as far, but everybody's working on the same material. And in the end, he ended up telling the whole class, he almost broke down talking to them, and they could tell he was so proud of that entire class. And so he was just so genuine with them and owning his mistakes, and being able to see that transformation within one class was incredible. Second story along in the same vein, there was also in a different grade, there was a student who was really, really struggling. He had no relationship with her because she had been like, I don't use the word traumatized lightly. She had been traumatized with math at another school. So when she came to us, she knew how to hide. She knew how to not engage. She knew how to not cause trouble. And he said, it's like when I'm talking, she's not even hearing me. And I said, yeah, I think she's actually not listening to you, and it's fine. So I started working with her on the side, rather than expecting her to be in the math class. And again, I worked on more of the cognitive load piece, made it more accessible, got her buy-in, and then it was important to me to reintegrate her into the class. And that's when he said, I think I need to meet with her and talk to her so she knows I'm on her side. And so we had this incredible conversation with her, and I kind of came into the math class to interact with her to make sure she was like having the behaviors of a math student and participating. And one day she raised her hand and said, hey, mister, and gave his name and said, I don't know what's going on right now. And she did that publicly and in the class because she had a sense of belonging and agency. And it was just this incredible experience. And this image on the side, she's an artist. This is her prime factorization Christmas tree, because these are the type of things that she really connected with. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap up there, but I hope this has been either an informative thing if you're a math teacher, or a healing thing if you need it, or just interesting if you already love math. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Beth. I would really like to put it to the audience now and see if anyone has any questions for
Thank you for all the
Beth.
comments.
All
This was fun.
Oh, we have a question. Please unmute yourself, Ariel, and ask a question.
Hi, Beth. That was fantastic. Oh my gosh, hang on. I have you on two places. Hang on. Okay, that's better. I actually found that I wanted to comment because I found it a healing experience.
Oh, good.
I was quite brilliant in math as a child, and then I went to college, and I had not had much math background because I went to a very limited high school actually, and I hadn't had math at all for a year. But I'd done really well, and in fact, I got a little math award my first year of college on a test. But I got 790 on the SAT without studying,
Wow.
But my first semester, I took calculus at college, and I had a Russian grad student teaching who came from a whole different system and didn't know.
Yeah.
I don't think he knew that he was in a different, right. And I was getting 30s on the tests. And I was absolutely devastated. And it wasn't until the end, I mean, I stayed. I kept struggling and asking questions, whatever. It wasn't until the end of the semester when they put all the different sections of us together and we had someone else write the test and the final exam, and I got 105 because there were 7. I missed 2 points out of it because there were 107 points possible.
Wow.
And I found out that everybody else had been getting 18s. I was getting 30s and other people were getting 18s. But I was so devastated, I never took another math class.
Yeah.
And nobody has empathized with me really ever since. Like it was a very traumatic experience. It disrupted my career plans. It was like really traumatic. And this is the first time that it really has occurred to me that one of the reasons it's kind of hung around for me is because I've never gotten empathy about it.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
In a significant way. So
thank you for sharing that.
I was just very moved hearing that, feeling like, yeah, I love math. Like I love math. And fascinated by all the arts and like all the things that you brought into it, like really fascinating. And it was a healing experience to hear it. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. There's another question in the chat from Kelly Turk.
Yes, I actually had a chance to read it, so I can. Sorry, do you want to read it for everybody?
No, I don't want to read it. No, if you read it, good.
This is one of the most important questions in my mind so it's how do you balance the content, because we need the kids to learn the math. It's critically important to me, and I always forget to say it. I don't just care about the sunshine and rainbows. I want every student to have access to higher level math so they never have to limit their career. To echo what we just heard. And so understanding the role of having to support the social emotional along with the content. Most compelling thing I've ever heard is that a student who is afraid and stressed is going to have retention issues. And so that for me, I think may help unlock for some people, but I also at the same time have to acknowledge it's not all on the teacher to save every student, because it's really challenging to have students in your class that they may be outside the realm of where you can address where they're at, but interacting with them in kind ways, finding ways to support the foundational underpinnings. It's why I'm working on the program Sharmila mentioned called the Math Atlas, that teachers have a ready-made go-to resource that digs down deep. So like, let's say you're working on the Pythagorean theorem, but they don't know what exponents are. That there could be a quick supplemental piece to kind of show what to do. I'm hoping by next year I'll be at the conference presenting that. But thank you. I think it's a really important question. If you contact me via email, I'm terrible about, can I just share my email in the chat? I'm happy to hear from anybody.
Of course.
I'm really bad about that. Sorry. And Callie in particular, I think we're both in the Bay Area, so it'd be very easy to connect. Okay, in the interest of time, I will say thank you so much.
So I do have to thank you, Beth, for sharing that. This was a very meaningful talk, especially for me in the program with my interest in math instruction. And thank you for linking the expressive language piece to math strugglers. I think that link includes a whole bunch of people that have so far not have been marginalized in the student population. So all the perspective taking, the perspective shifting in math teaching and how we view math learning is, you covered it all. So thank you for a very, very informative and dynamic talk. Thanks, Beth.
Thank you.